Chapter 7.1 Key Takeaways. So, by the end of this, you should be able to describe the changing nature of the U.S. worker characteristics, and you should also be able to explain the issues that businesses face with the U.S. labor force. So, let's go ahead and review everything that you have learned in your 7.1 packet. We're going to start with characteristics of workers. So, according to a recent study of top managers, found that retaining qualified workers was more important than finance, technology, product innovation, or international business. So, they're essentially saying that uh, finding the right workers is way more important than maintaining their budget, having updated and appropriate technology, uh, being ahead of the curve when it comes to the products that they're putting out and being inventive with those things, or even building relationships with other companies overseas. They said none of that matters. What really matters is that we're retaining qualified workers. And at the end of the day, like, that's pretty accurate. If you think about it, if you don't have the right people on the seat in the bus, which is an expression of saying, like, if you don't have the right people in the correct positions, um, your business isn't going to be successful, right? You're not going to have the right skill set there to be able to make your business successful. So, social change affects how businesses operate. And how, right? Well, as things change in our world and as we have events happen, think about recent school shootings, right? It changed the landscape of America. We now have higher security. We are going to put in metal detectors eventually when you guys come into school, right? I have an app that goes off if there's an emergency. Like, that changed the landscape of how businesses operate, right? Think about how you just had to put your cell phone into the yonder pouch. Well, why do you think you had to do that, right? Well, it's because it's affecting your grades and how you learn and how you think. And you might not know, but it actually perpetrates more violence in schools. It's probably a statistic you haven't heard, but social change affects how businesses operate. Um, and it really plays back into the kind of characteristics of the workers and who's working for you and how your business is going to change over time. Our next thing we want to look at is growing population. So, as the standard of living increases, so standard of living is like how much you pay for stuff. So, back in the 1950s, you may have paid like 50 cents for milk, right? Now you're going to go to the store and you're going to pay almost $3 for milk. Okay, so standard of living is how much it costs to live. So, as the standard of living increases, as we have to pay more for things, the birth rates fall. Well, why? Okay. Why is that happening? Well, people realize how expensive it is to live. Okay. Um, and babies are not cheap. Okay. It costs a lot, not only to give birth, because our medical care here in the United States is not great, but then all those things that you have to buy for that child, it's expensive. So as the standard of living increases and we have to pay more for stuff, people aren't willing or open to having children, okay? Because it's expensive. So when the population increases and people do have babies, it's normally due to immigration, okay? Or people coming into the United States. It's not so much that the birth rate increases, I'm sorry, I misspoke, but that the immigration happens. So let's look at some data here. So in the 2000 census, so the census is something that you have to take every 10 years. It's like this form that you have to fill out. So in 2000, 35 million Hispanics came over to the United States. In 2010, there were 50 million Hispanics in the US. So that increase from 2000 to 2010 accounted for more than half of the US population. It's projected that within the next 70 years, Caucasians are going to be the minority and that people of color are going to be the majority here in the United States. And this is just a simple explanation for that, right? 50 million Hispanics in 2010, and we just took the 2020 census, and I can only imagine that that is much higher. Our next slide here is about the changing population. So we talked a little bit about the baby bust and how in the 1940s, when the war was over, couples got together and they made it and they had a lot of babies. Okay. There was a huge increase in the population because people were getting married and wanting to live life because the war happened and people are like, oh man, now's the time. Life is short. We want to live our life to the fullest, but also because the standard of living was pretty low. There really wasn't a whole lot of cost at that time to really start having a family and getting married. Okay. So the standard of living was low. Of course, people are going to want to have babies, right? We just talked about if the standard of living is high, people aren't going to want to have babies. But what happened was when the standard of living started going up, okay, that's when the baby bust happened. People were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, it is way too expensive right now to live. And people just stopped having babies. And so what happens when you stop having babies is the baby bust happens. And as those people grow up, we're going to have a shortage of workers. Okay. So there was, the baby bust happened in like 60s and 70s. And nowadays, people who are in their 60s and 70s, or I'm sorry, that were born in the 60s and 70s, they're in their 50s, maybe mid 60s. Okay. And for a long time, there wasn't enough people to fill positions because there weren't enough babies being made at that time. Okay. So it created a shortage of workers when the baby bust happened. And so it was really easy to be able to find a job. Okay. Which is one of the reasons why those generations matter, like the baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Z. They matter because it's either increasing the population or decreasing the population. And in a few years, because we're not having babies as much nowadays, in 20 years, there's going to be a lot of open positions. Okay. If you go out into Fort Wayne, you're going to see a tremendous amount of positions open. Everybody's hiring. Okay. You should be able to find a job. All right. Because we're not having as many babies now. So it has and creates a shortage of workers. So let's take a little bit closer look here at those populations I just talked about. So baby boomers, all right, these are some things that to think about when we would hire somebody born in that era. So baby boomers, they grew up without electronics or computers. So if you're going to hire a baby boomer, it could be a little bit harder to train them because they may not be as knowledgeable as we are now with technology. Okay. Generation X, they were born during the baby bust. Okay. So there's not a whole lot of them. And they had a higher chance of being employed upon joining the workforce. So they kind of learned as they went, right? They're going to be a little bit more adaptable in the workforce, a little bit more willing to work because there are so many open jobs. Then you have millennials. All right. I'm a millennial, folks. I was born in 1983. Oh, that makes me 40 this year or last year. Millennials, they're more flexible with technology. They can also do non-tech jobs as well because I didn't have my first phone until I was, I think, a sophomore in high school because that's when they first came out and it was like a brick, folks. Okay. Not like what we have today. So I actually did not really have a computer available to me until like junior year of high school. So I really had to learn on the fly on how to use that technology to write papers or to get on social media at the time. And it has allowed me to kind of sit into both and be comfortable in both, right? And then you got Generation Z. They're waiting longer to have kids. All right. You guys will wait longer to have kids. Why? Because you're going to be focused on your career first. I think nowadays people just aren't rushing to have babies like they were before. People are waiting until they're in their 30s, even sometimes 40, to even just get married, let alone have kids. All right, ethnic populations. Due to the increase of different ethnic populations in the workforce, managers need to be better at these three things. So there's a big push right now for having cultural diversity in the workplace and being aware of those things that are happening that could be discriminating against people who are people of color. So these are some things that are important to keep in mind with ethnic populations. So cross-cultural communication. So you're having communication with them, making sure that they're feeling comfortable getting their ideas. Number two, sensitivity to interests and concerns of various groups. So one of the things that I didn't think about when I was doing marketing is that because I'm a white woman, I would more likely pick an image of a white family, okay? But if I'm trying to market to multiple different people, I would want to pick a picture that would display different ethnicities, right? And not always just go for what I'm comfortable with, which would be in which I see myself in, which would be a Caucasian family, right? So if I'm marketing, I want to make sure that I'm using different ethnicities in my marketing pieces, right? And number three is deal with workers from multi-generations. So think about if you're dealing with a worker who's a baby boomer and they just cannot figure out how to work a printer, okay? You're not going to yell at them, but you're going to have to work with them because they don't know how to do it, right? They didn't grow up with printers or they didn't grow up knowing how to work with technology. So you have to have some patience, especially with different generations who may have grown up differently than you if you're in a management position. All right, let's talk a little bit about moving populations. So when businesses moved from the Rust Belt, so we learned all about these belts, right? They all have important significance. The Rust Belt in particular is really in the Midwest. So like up in Detroit was like the mecca of the Rust Belt. That's where all these automotives industries were. There's a lot of factories. And when those shut down, it had a huge impact on the area. Okay, so when businesses moved from the Rust Belt and they moved to other cities because maybe it was in a better climate, maybe it was cheaper, maybe they had employees that were more willing to work, it caused a huge ripple effect economically in that area. So think about Detroit right now. Like it's still trying to recoup from when all those factories moved out. Lots of houses are closed. Think about Flint. Flint had the big issue with water. So there's a lot of things that can happen. So a couple of those things are lost financial ability to provide high quality services. Crime and poverty increases. Unemployed workers. So a lot of people are unemployed, which is only going to add into the crime and poverty. The factories close. There's no place to work. Decaying towns. There's so many houses right now in Michigan that are boarded up and are just falling apart. Homeless people, if you don't have a place to work and you can't provide for yourself, like the homeless population, especially in like Flint and Detroit, where's the mecca of the Rust Belt, the homeless population is crazy. So it definitely has a ripple effect when companies decide to move elsewhere because the opportunity is better. All right. So let's think about this. So I said at the end of this, you're going to be able to answer some of these questions. So this checkpoint question is, what factors are influencing shifts in the U.S. worker characteristics? So what's happening to make workers look different, right? So First one, population growth, right? We have more Hispanics coming into the United States. We have less people giving birth, so there's more opportunities and positions for people to take jobs. And then, geographic shifts. So you have all these factories that have been up in the Rust Belt or the Frost Belt, and they're moving down into the Sun Belt because it's warmer, it's cheaper, and overall, they're going to be more successful being in a better climate with people who want to work. All right, looking at the labor force, the question here is, why have women decided to enter the workforce? Okay, for a long time, women, they were not entering the workforce. They were staying at home, right? Their job was being a stay-at-home mom, all right? But a lot of them, especially in the 70s, they really started moving into the workforce to be able to help out. But why have women decided now to enter? So a lot of them they're just waiting to be married. So they're waiting until they're 30, 40 years old before they get married. There's no real rush for women to want to get married now. So they have to provide for themselves. So they're going to enter the workforce. They want to pursue careers before children. A lot of women nowadays, their ultimate goal isn't kids, right? They want to have a successful career. The mentality and the goals have switched a bit. Families needed more money due to standard of living. I'm a parent, folks. I got 2 kids. Let me tell you what. I would not be able to live if I did not work, right? The standard of living requires both my husband and I to work. So families need money to be able to live. And also because there's families that are being raised as single parents. So again, that goes back to standard of living, right? You have to work if you want to survive. So that's one of the reasons, or many reasons, why women are now entering the workforce. In addition, since 1950, around 37% of women worked outside of their home. Okay, 37%, which isn't that high. But by 2015, the amount has risen to 57%, and it's only gotten higher since then. So as we kind of talked about how it's shifted, that can kind of show you a little bit of data of how much the labor force has changed with women going to work. Okay, poverty. Due to programs such as Social Security, poverty among elderly people is much lower than before. So Social Security is established to be able to help elderly people live after they retire. So not only should you save for retirement, but Social Security is going to kick in to help you to be able to live once you reach retirement age, which is currently 65 years old. And the government also offers the following programs to help reduce poverty, not just with the elderly, but just everybody in general. And we've already talked a little bit about this, but let's reiterate it. So Social Security, minimum wage, unemployment benefits, financial or food aid, so like food stamps, and subsidized medical care, like Medicaid or Medicare. All right, so those are some of the things that the government offers to kind of help with people who are in poverty or to help reduce poverty. All right, equal employment. Several laws have been passed to outlaw discrimination on the basis of some different areas. So we've talked a little bit and said, we're legally mandated to make sure that there's equal employment, but here are the areas in which are protected, okay? Race, gender, so male, female, non-binary, etc. National origin, where you are originally from. Color, so that means African American, Caucasian, Mexican, Asian. Religion, so Christian, Muslim. Age, and then also physical disability. And there's another one that kind of sneaks in there too, and that is women who are currently pregnant. So you can legally not hire somebody because they're pregnant, right? So those are the areas that are legally protected when it comes to equal employment. All right, comparable worth. So we talked already a lot about this. So comparable worth, again, is two jobs that require the same level of training and responsibility, and the pay should be equal. Okay. So again, to decide if work is of equal value, managers compare factors such as skills, physical strength or physical ability, job dangers, responsibility, and again, education. So I talked about how if two people have the same job, but one of them has a master's degree, they're going to get paid more money, right? So those are things to think about when we're looking at comparable worth. All right. The last question here is, what factors influence the U.S. labor force? Well, those answers are gender, job choice, okay, pay equity. So are people getting paid equal? And then labor participation rate. How many people are currently working? Okay, so you got to think about what kind of jobs are available and who's choosing to work them. Male, female, are they getting paid, or is there equal comparable worth? And then that labor participation rate, which is usually seen as being 16 years of age or older. Okay. Well, I hope that you have learned maybe something that you haven't learned quite yet, and that this overview was helpful for you. All right. Thanks.